So I went to my wife, I said, well, it stopped. And she says, well, I thought this was our retirement. And I go, well, it was, till it wasn't. And she goes, well, what are we going to do? I go, well, I don't know, except we're going to stay in peace and joy because God is creative and that creativity is enhanced when we are in joy. So we're not going to fret and worry because we have enough. And every day we can ask that question, do we have enough? And we'll just see where it goes.
All right, we're back for another episode of Christians Talking Business. My name is Kurt Storing. This episode, as always, is brought to you by Proclaim Podcasting. If you are a Christian coach or entrepreneur who has a podcast and you just want to hit record and have everything else done for you, go to proclaimpodcasting.com to book a call and they will hook you up. So today's guest is my good friend, Steve Petermeyer. And Steve was actually up here a few months ago and he stayed in this very office if you're watching on YouTube because this is my guest room now too. Steve, how are you? Thanks for being here.
I'm great, thanks. Really looking forward to this.
No, I'm excited about this, and this was another opportunity, like you said, to just get you in my calendar because those are some of the best conversations that we have. And like I said to you, I want to start off with the business side of things because that's what people are here for. But I'm most excited about your storytelling. I'm most excited about how God works in the unknown and how we can step into that as business people who honestly want to control things more than we should. But let's just start at the beginning. So you have been in real estate now for some time. Can you walk me through the business progression of that? And we'll sort of hit points along the way. I'll ask questions and sort of lead us up to where we are. So take me back. Young Steve, strapping young man. He's like, I think real estate's a good idea. What does that look like?
Well, I came out of a nonprofit, Young Life, that I worked for 16 years. And I got tired of raising my own salary. And it was like, you know what? I'm going to do something else. And I did a mid-career assessment. And they said, you would make a very good real estate agent or an appraiser or something. You know, they give you all those things. And it's like, I'd always loved real estate. When I was a kid, my mom and I used to go around to where they were building houses and we would go find, because back then they didn't have lock boxes or any of that. This is, in the 60s. And the contractors would just leave a key to the house over the door to the garage. And so we knew that. And so we would basically break into these houses, my mom and I, and we'd walk through them and talk about the houses, what we thought was good and bad. So I'd always loved houses. So it was like, all right, I'm going to do this. So I took a little bit of, I think I had maybe $15,000 that I had amassed through Young Life from pension or something. I don't know, some retirement account. And so I put that into getting my business started in real estate.
Tell me about that assessment thing, because I think I talk to a lot of guys, especially in my old business dad work, who are very scared to make decisions like this. And so whether someone listening is in a business now where it doesn't feel right, like mine did and like you helped me walk through, or they're at a place like you where it's like, I think it's time for something else. Was that like a specific book or course, or was it just like, hold on, I'm going to take stock of my life now?
Well, it was actually like Young Life paid for it because I had just gone through a sabbatical and I was kind of questioning things. And they said, well, why don't you take this, join up with this company? And they were a company that did these mid-career assessments. So it was actually in person because that's how everything was done then. And I met for, I think, 4 times with this guy, took these tests. And then he sat down with me and said, here's what you ought to be doing. And it was very interesting because he said, you either need to change your job or change your job description because this isn't working for who you are.
Oh, that's a big piece, the identity.
Yes, and it was part of identity that I didn't even understand then. And he said to me, you need to have a changeover of people all the time. You don't do well with the same over and over and over.
Man, okay. I'm going to make a note on coming back to identity because that should be a big piece of this. Okay, so you're starting this real estate. You need some money to get going. What does that look like? Is that like, what are you even as a real estate person? Were you just a broker under someone else? Did you start your own thing? Because I saw the Petermeyer group. I don't even know what the setup of that is. Can you walk us through what that looked like the early years?
Well, when I first started out, you interviewed with real estate offices and asked them if they need somebody else or if they would hire you to be one of their sales associates. And it wasn't, you're an independent contractor, but you had to affiliate with an office under a broker. Because when you start out as a sales associate, you're not a broker and you can only work under a broker. Things have changed a lot since then, but this was 1989 or something. And so I found this company through a friend of mine, well, the owner of the company. I met with him. He said, "Yeah, we'll take a chance on you." So that's how it started. And literally, they put me in an office that had a phone. There was no training. They just said, "Okay, go get them." And I sat. It was so interesting. My little office was on the other side of the wall where people wrote with chalk on a chalkboard their sales. So I'm sitting there at my desk and I'm hearing on the other side every time somebody sales a house and they're putting it up on the chalkboard. And it drove me crazy because it's like, okay, another one I didn't get, and so it was this constant thing. And it was counterproductive for me because when I went into this business, I had asked God about how to do this because I wanted to do it in a way that honored him. And we had 3 little children at home. I think at that point they were 7 and 5 and 3 or something like that. And God had told me, "I don't want you to work on evenings and weekends." Well,
I don't know much about realty, but that doesn't sound usual.
No. And I went to the broker and told him, I said, "Well, I'm not going to work on evenings and weekends." And he goes, "Well, that's not going to work. There's no way you can make it in this business not doing that." I said, "Well," and he was a believer. And I said, "Well, that's what I believe God wants me to do, and I'm going to honor him. And so that's the way I'm going to do it." And my business just took off. And within the first couple of years, I was making $100,000, which back then was big money. And it just took off. And I started putting a team together and would find these young men that I was involved with through Young Life, and they needed jobs. And so I would have them work for me. And I spawned other people's careers into commercial real estate. And I think I added up, 12 or 14 people are in real estate now because they started with me, and they always leave, which, you expect to happen. And so it's been a pretty cool ride, and it took off and did very well.
Wow. Okay. So that was the early years. And then you buy a brokerage. Is that what happened in 2007, 2008? Like, talk me through the business sense of that. Cause you're a realtor, you're doing well. And then what's this progression to buying Keller Williams? What is that even called? Is it a franchise? Okay.
Keller Williams Franchise. So I had kept hearing about passive income, and I had bought some houses and tried to rent them and do that and kind of be a landlord. And I just wasn't good at that because I would just give stuff away. And I would give housing to people that shouldn't really have houses, and they end up destroying them. And it was just like, okay, I can't do this. And so I thought, well, Keller Williams was starting out, so they were doing lots of franchises. And it was like, maybe that could be something I'd do. And so I met up with some people who were starting a franchise and trying to put the team together. And they were just stalling on it. It wasn't going anywhere. And finally, I met with the regional representative and said, "Look, this isn't going anywhere." He says, "Why don't you just do it?" And I go, "Okay, well, can I do that? Can I just tell these other people you aren't doing this anymore? I'm going to." And he said, "Yeah, I'm giving you the right to do that." So I did. And then I put my team together that I wanted to do this with. And so we're talking it through. It's 4 other brokers from 4 other firms. So it's a big deal. They have to leave their firm. And Keller Williams didn't have a great reputation at that point because it really hadn't gone anywhere yet. And people were leery of it because they do profit sharing, and people were calling it, "Oh, it's a scheme," and, all that stuff. But we went ahead and all was going well. And then I got a call from one of those other three people that I was going to go in business with. And they called me up. I was one of the women, and she called and she said, "Can we meet with you?" And I go, "Yes, of course." I mean, we'd been meeting a number of times, but this had a different tone to it. "We'd like to come to your house and meet with you." And I knew immediately, that feeling that happens inside. You just go, "Oh no."
Yep.
And they came and met with me. And this is 2007. Okay. And they said, "We can't do this. It's too big of a risk. The reputation isn't there yet. We don't feel good about this." And, imagine these are people that I trusted. I'd done business with over the years. We had a great relationship. And they're basically telling me, "You can't do this. And we don't trust you. And it's not going to work." They left my house that day. I went up to our bedroom. I didn't even say anything to my wife. I just went upstairs and I fell onto the bed and wept bitterly. Like, what's happening? And so the next day I called the regional guy and I said, "Look, I just had this conversation and this just happened and I don't know what to do." And he said, "Well, why don't you just do it yourself?" And it was like, I have to come up with $250,000 to do this. Where am I going to get that? Well, that was 2007, before the crash, which happened immediately after I bought this franchise. But I went to a savings and loan place and told them what my finances had been up to that point. And I'd done very well. I think the team was making $750,000. I mean, it was doing very well. And they just go, "Yes, we'll give you $250,000 unsecured." That wouldn't happen today. And so I said, okay. So I started this franchise. And we started out, found the office space, all the stuff you have to go through. I was doing all of it. Took my focus off of my real estate in order to do this, because this is going to be my passive income. And then 2008 hit, and we had, I think, 30 agents in the office. I was borrowing money from everybody I knew, family members, anyone that would loan me money so I could make the payroll each month to keep the place open. And we made it through for about a year doing that, patching things together. And then I went to the regional guy again, and I go, "Look, I need to find somebody to help me out with this. This is going badly." Every realtor was freaked out. Most of them were leaving the business. And so he said, "Well, let me see what I can find." And I'm thinking, who wants to buy a real estate office in 2009? I mean, that would be crazy. Well, these two guys came along. They were involved in Keller Williams' other offices. They saw opportunity. And they came and they wanted to buy it. And so I sold 80% of it for pennies on the dollar. I went home to my wife that day. I said, "Well, we're going to sell it." And I think I had borrowed. And so I found this, actually cut off the credit line once all the hell broke loose with the economy. The savings loan cut off so I had borrowed up to that point, I think, $150,000. And they said, "Well, no, you can't have any more." I mean, what? I guess they can do that. So at this point, it's like, okay, I'm going to sell 80%. I think they gave me $70,000 or something. And then I kept 20%. And so I was able to pay off one of the friends that had loaned me like 80 grand. So I paid him off. And so I have 20% of this company, but I now have no role in it other than to just be a realtor in the office. It was the best thing that ever happened, because I needed to fire myself from the position I was in. It didn't fit me, and managing a real estate office was not it. And so it really ended up being a great thing, because I was able to let it go. And then, went back to focusing on my real estate.
And that ended up working out reasonably well in terms of the business side of things after a number of years? Because that's terrifying to think of being in that position in that industry at that time. And yet it sounds like things turned around reasonably well. And that 20% was like not a bad little chunk there. So talk about the last number of years, because I know a year or two ago, something else happened. So maybe walk us through that nice period where things seemed to be working. And then a couple years ago, what happens?
It was amazing from because as soon as these guys bought the office and stepped in, it just took off. And because this was now 2010, 11-ish, and the market was changing anyway, and that was the biggest part of it. And it took off, and I was every quarter money coming into my savings account, and we lived on it for 10 years. And so definitely paid back anything I had put into it and more. And so it was wonderful. And we survived on that for 10 years, because most of my real estate at that point, getting my team going again was a slow process. And I had gotten distracted by other things. I was doing ministry stuff in Los Angeles and in other places. And I was able to focus on that because the money just came in a passive way, which was very nice.
Okay.
Then
Until
the interest rate changed. What was that? Just before the pandemic, and all the rest. And so that suddenly changed. And so it was like, okay, I got to get things going again. Just before that time, in the middle of that, our house burned down. We lived in it for 30 years. We lost everything. And so we had to build a big house on 3 acres, and in Portland, land is very valuable. And so on this 3 acres, we ended up building a big home, as big as we could, with the insurance money. And the insurance money ended up being, okay, so I have to go back. A year prior, I was meeting with my real estate coach, and I said, this house that I have is a noose around my neck, because we had borrowed off of it for, living and for the office to keep it going and all that. And so we owed more than it was worth. And I told him, I said, this house is a noose around my neck. I don't know what to do with this. And a month later, it burned down.
Wow.
And it was awful. I mean, we were on our way. We were driving to my wife's father's memorial service 6 hours away in Medford, Oregon. And my neighbor calls and says, your house is on fire. So we had to keep going. And so we went to the memorial service. It was 2 days there while our house burns down, and everybody's calling us and all this great turmoil. It was, for my wife, she was taken out for probably 6-7 months because of the loss of everything, all your memories, all your photos, all that, all that stuff. And God said to me, I heard it so clearly. He said, it's going to be better than it was before. And, that's hard to hear in some ways, but I'm a forever optimist anyway. And I just couldn't share all that with my wife. But the day after the house burned down, God did say to me, he said, I want you to have a celebration. I want you to call it a celebration of memories. And our house had been kind of the center of ministry for Young Life, because we volunteered after I left full time. We volunteered for another 25 years at the local high school. And so our place is where everybody came after camp and brought their parents. We had 3 acres and a volleyball court and all that stuff. And so it was just the center of things. Well, when the house burned down, everybody was involved in it and interested. And so we had a celebration a week later. The house is burned down behind us in the backyard. And we had 125 people show up just to talk about how God had been faithful over the years and all the things that had happened on that property. So it was pretty amazing. And then we rebuilt, and then 2 years later, we were done, and we had another celebration, brought all those people back to see the new house that we had built. And we built this big house so that we could get the most we could from it. And then 4 years later, we lived in it for 4 years, then sold it, moved into a new house up the street, not a new house, but an older house that was new for us, built in 55. And we moved into it, smaller house, and we lived in it for 3 months. We go, this isn't working. And we had enough money now from the other house where we could work on this. So I took time off of real estate and everything and was the general contractor, took the house down to the studs. We're in it now, took the roof off, made a big great room, and redid the whole house. It took 10 months, and it was wonderful. I had a great time. I loved it. And the result of it was people come to our house to have dinner or whatever, and they would come and go, love what you did. This is amazing. Will you come to my house? And so that developed over the last couple of years into this business of general contracting. But it's the most amazing thing because I'm not a licensed general contractor. I just am a consultant, and I have a general contractor that he and I team up, and he is the general contractor. He has all the liability. He has his team. He has like 15 guys. And they're amazing at what they do. And I gave him business through the tough years. And so he is totally committed to me. And I make 15% of all these projects. And all I do is consult with the owners. When they have issues, they bring it to me. And then I work as them. Most of them don't speak great English, but I know how to get along with them. And so they come to me instead of them so they can complain about things. And it doesn't feel like it's to the person that did it. And so I'm that buffer, and I make 15% on all these projects, and some of them are $300,000 projects. And so it's just so fun because I get to share my ideas, my creativity, without any liability.
Man, okay, so this is where we get into how God works. This is where we get into like house burns down, this happens, you move into that house, it sucks, you do something about it, and now God's providing. But let's talk about that interest rate, which we kind of got away from. Interest rate goes up. This place, this Keller Williams franchise is basically printing you some money that you're living on for 10 years. And then it stops more or less. Is that what happened? And I think you told
me. Oh, not more or less.
Absolutely. Okay, so the money stops. And you had a conversation with your wife. And, you can tell the story, but something about retirement. So just to give this context, right? Because it's like, oh, that's nice. You got realty, you got this contracting. Like, oh, great, Steve. But this isn't just, oh, great. This is like God providing in a way where you have to trust him. So what happens? Interest rate goes up and you got to tell your wife what's going on there.
So I go to my wife, because I went into the office and talked to him. I said, look, what's happening here? And is this just going to stop now? And they go, well, we've had to restructure everything in order to keep real estates wanting to be a part of this. So we had to restructure everything. So we're getting less money from everybody. We're still trying to grow it, but we're in a stall period. And it's going to be a while. We don't know how long before it's making money again. So I went to my wife. I said, well, it stopped. And she says, well, I thought this was our retirement. And I go, well, it was till it wasn't. And she goes, well, what are we going to do? And I go, well, I don't know, except we're going to stay in peace and joy because God is creative and that creativity is enhanced when we are in joy. And so we're not going to fret and worry because we have enough. And every day we can ask that question, do we have enough? And we'll just see where it goes. And that is when all this general contracting stuff started. And I had no idea I was going to be doing that. And it's just, this thing that just happened. And then from then I also had time. So I started doing coaching. Through an organization called Identity Exchange that changed my life in learning my identity and learning to walk in it and learning to walk free of fears and lies that keep us from living out who we truly are. And so I started doing coaching with that. So now my life is, I do coaching. I travel around the country sharing with groups of people like in Vancouver, British Columbia. And next week I go to Nashville and then Detroit. And then Dallas, and and I get to share this different way of knowing God and knowing your identity and walking in it. And I have fun with it. And sometimes I get paid. And so there's these little pieces. It's like the other day I was watching Naked and Afraid. It's a great show. They drop these people in the wilderness, usually in Bali or someplace like that, in a jungle, Africa, with no food, no clothes, and they drop them off there and they have to survive. And this one the other day I was watching, it's so interesting. And, they blur everything out, so it's not like weird or anything. But the other day, this guy was saying, well, he was trying to catch fish and there were alligators in the pond. And he goes, well, I'm just going to put different lines in different pools. And if I put enough lines in enough pools, something will come. And that's how he survived through that time. And I thought, that's what has happened to me. And God did it. It wasn't an intentional thing. It was just, okay, well, I'm going to put a line here in general contracting, see what happens there, and a line here with coaching, and a line here with still doing some real estate. And, so, just putting lines in the water. And each month, there seems to be something and enough. And so we survive.
How has it felt the last couple of years being in this significant unknown compared to the 10 years before that, where things were seemingly fine, everything was rosy, you were traveling? What has been the feeling of that in your day to day, and what's the heart position been like? Has it been good or has it been terrifying? Like, it doesn't sound like it's easy, but it sounds very rich in a weird sort of way.
Yeah, it's a constant. It's a constant thing of having to remind myself that God does provide. He has provided and will provide. And so I have to go through this process. And it's really a process of, the first thing is just telling God the truth. So often in my past life, I really didn't tell him the truth, because you're not supposed to tell God that you don't trust him and that he doesn't really care about you and he isn't coming through and he's not going to. And, he doesn't exist, basically. You can't do that. You're not supposed to do that. I've known him since I was 17 and I've walked with Jesus and trusted him, but there are times where you don't. And I learned to tell him the truth. So if I wake up and I'm fearful and I'm feeling like there's not enough, I just have to tell him. So I tell him, there's not going to be enough. You aren't going to come through. You don't care. Either you don't care or you're impotent, because it isn't going to happen. And so I just need to tell you that that's how I feel right now. And then the second part of it is then telling him or asking him again, what is the truth? That's my truth. My truth is I don't believe you're going to come through. So God, what is the truth? And he reminds me again, I've always been with you. You're never alone. I've always provided for you. I always will provide for you. There is enough. You are enough. There is enough. So let's go. We'll do this together. He always adds that. So let's go. We'll do this together. And so then I go, okay, what would I do if there was enough? What would I do today if there was enough? And that's what I do. And sometimes it's, the other day, this is before I had this miracle happen on tax day. I was wondering where money was going to come for taxes. And I'm helping my neighbor with some plants in their yard, because they're not very good with plants. And I love landscaping, and I kind of do that on the side too. If people need help with their landscaping, I'll go and help them out. So I'm helping out this neighbor. I designed their backyard for them and all this. And I'm down there working on my yard, and I'm over there talking with them. And she goes, oh, what's that plant you have over there? That's a beautiful plant. And I think that would look really good. What kind is that? And I told her what kind it was. And I had bought 2 of them the day before. And God just says to me, go give the other one to her. And it's like, there's enough. So I walked up to my house, I grabbed the other plant and brought it down, and I go, here. And I said to her, here's my gift to you. And she goes, oh, I can't take that. And I go, no, it's yours. And it's so fun because in the back of my mind, when I first think of it, I'm going, oh, but that costs some money. And it's like, just give it. There's enough. So what would you do if there was enough? Well, I'd give it to her. So go give it to her. And just the joy of then doing it, it's like there's a peace that comes over you when you live in the truth, right? So the truth is there's enough. So when I live in that by faith, not because there's evidence of it, but by faith, there's peace and joy that comes from it. And so it was so fun.
Man, that's so good. I love that, man. I feel like every time we talk, there's another one of those. And it's like you seem to be very obedient with this, and that's been so inspiring. And to see it actually play out in real life, I know that Steve's not full of it, and so it's just extremely inspiring. But I wanted to ask you, you are around circles like me, sort of 30 to 50-year-old business owners, Christians, usually fathers. I think there's a few things that we tend to share, usually related to identity, usually that drives us to be successful from a worldly point of view. But in my experience, and I know a lot of my colleagues, it really winds us up on the spiritual side. And it's often not enough. And so maybe just with that as a thread, can we just pull on that a little bit with all the men you're working with? Because I know you're flying around seeing some other guys that I know. What are the things, guys listening to this podcast, me, other men, what are you seeing in your coaching and your ministry and your time with guys that's keeping us from being able to live in the truth? Because we've worked through it, you and I, and it was a huge set of lies. I'm not enough. God doesn't actually love me unless I perform. There's this expectation that it's all on me. Is that common, or are there other things like that we can sort of dissect here? Because we can talk about business all day, but if the heart of the businessman, if the heart of the listener, heart of me isn't aligned with, the truth, God's will, it's not ever going to matter, no matter how much we make. Do you want to just riff on that for a little bit? What kind of similarities are you seeing that people are struggling with?
Well, I believe the first one is across the board with everyone that I've had contact with, that whether you know Jesus or not, everyone has fear. And if they say, well, I don't fear, then I'll just ask, well, when was the most recent time that you woke up in the middle of the night and you couldn't go back to sleep? And what was it you were thinking about? Because it's generally always the same thing. It's, is there going to be enough? And I have to make it happen. And so that's huge. And so that comes from the fact that we really don't believe. So God says that he will provide all our needs through his boundless resources in Christ Jesus. But we don't believe that. If we believed it, we wouldn't be anxious and fearful, and we wouldn't have anxiety and all those things. But we have those because we don't believe the things that we say we believe. So we believe it in our head, but it's not lived out in faith because we don't know what that is. So I'll say he provides everything for me, but then I watch these people that are grinding themselves to death, trying to make something happen, and worried and fearful, and they don't know what to do with it. And for the provider of a family, which is sometimes both the husband and the wife or the two partners, but generally the man tends to feel it stronger. It's all on me. I'm all alone, and I'm never going to meet up to the expectation, and I'm stuck, basically. And I can say that, I'll have 10 to 15 calls a week and with guys, and it's all the same thing. And there are lies that we have believed that cause us to make it worse, where we can't get out of it because we believe these lies. And these lies start when we're young. I was just talking to a guy yesterday, and it started with him when he didn't make the team. And he was like fifth grade. He didn't make the team. He's a small kid and felt like he was smaller than everybody else. And it's basketball. And when you're small in basketball, and unless you're incredible, it just doesn't work very well. And he got rejected by this coach, and he felt like he wasn't enough and he would never be enough and he would always be small. And he lives with that today. And he's almost 40 years old. And he's not small anymore, but he still believes that he is. And he's done very well for himself. But it's because he is driven to do well for himself, and he doesn't know how to turn it off. And we actually talked about it, and he says, well, I know that's driven me, but what if that's gone? How will I keep going if that's gone? I won't have that thing to drive me anymore. And so then that's another lie, that we have to stay in that because it has been our friend when, oh no, it isn't our friend at all. And I'll just ask him, well, how is it with the family? How is it when you're alone with your kids? Can you turn it off? Well, no, that's a real problem. Yeah, okay, so let's talk about the real stuff of life. And so this is across the board.
Yeah, man. This is what I want. This is what I want to talk about. I like the business stuff. I like nerding out about that. But man, this is like I have experienced so much of that, as you know. So sports has been one for me. Like I remember scoring my first hockey goal, and I jumped in celebration, and some kid said, "Why did you jump?" And from that moment on, I thought, oh, it's not safe to celebrate. It's not safe to acknowledge, doing well. It's not safe to be me. And so that puts me in a box that for a long time, really up until the last few months, has made me do things that I thought other people wanted me to do. And there's 3 or 4 things that we've worked through like that specifically in my life. And I hear it all the time now that I know what I'm looking for from our conversations, from guys in the dad work group, just guys I talk to. It's like, oh, what's the lie there? Yeah. And it becomes so obvious because, like you said, it's not that peace and joy. It's not walking in faith. And I do know what it feels like to fear if that goes away. And what I found, and again, this is pretty new, but what I found is it's actually way better when you don't have that thing driving you, because you have all the habits and the muscle memory of how to be driven, but now you are longing for something, or you're wanting to serve God, or whatever that positive version of that is, without all the baggage. And so for me, it actually made me, I think, more effective. And also, I care less about that anyway. So it's this weird, double-sided, beautiful thing not to care so much about these old lies. Yeah. So what about, you told me a story about a guy who, was doing very well. And over the last number of years, as you've been just like fishing in these different ponds, I think he said something about how he envied you because you trusted in God, or you had to trust in God. And I think as we're talking about guys driven who have all this usually financial or business wealth, it can be easy to forget that we still need God. So is there something in here in terms of whether it's that story or something else that can really pull us back if guys listening have had success, or they're longing for that financial success, but there's a cost? So maybe just run into that story if you think that's relevant.
Yeah, well, there's a whole thing, and we won't have time to get into it, of 2 worldviews. And basically there's only 2 worldviews, and one is kingdom principles. And Jesus is the example of the kingdom worldview, and the other worldview is empire. And really, if you know anything of the Old Testament, the Pharaoh is the basic epitome of empire, or you could use Caesar. And they were always, and you look back and do any historical look at the lives of Pharaoh or of Caesar, there's never enough, even when they have everything they need. Pharaoh had everything. And yet, he is still having nightmares of scarcity. And so I do have this friend that I had to go to him, a high school friend, and we were involved in kind of youth group together in high school, and we've been friends over the years. And he's done very well. And I went to him. He ended up being one of the investors in my real estate office to get me through in that period of time. And he said to me one day when we were sitting there, and I'm kind of coming to him asking for this money for this thing, and he goes, "I envy you." And I'm thinking, well, I know some ways you could take care of that if you want to not envy me so much. And he goes, "I envy you because you have to trust God all the time. And when it comes to money, I don't need to trust him because he was set," which I don't believe that's even true, but
Yeah.
he believed he was set. And I was like, what? And then I thought, that really is true. It is such a blessing to be dependent on the one who never will let you down and has access to all the resources. So real quick, this little story, because I love it. It's just a little, it's not a true story, but this toy store owner decided he wanted to give to two kids, a boy and a girl, a free anything they wanted from his toy store. So they have this raffle. These two kids win. They come to the store, and it's like Toys R Us. And he says, okay, you can get one toy. Go find what you want. You get one item from the store. And so the kids start running. They go down the aisles, and this boy picks out this bike, and he brings it back. And the girl is looking for stuff. And then all of a sudden she stops. And it's like a light comes on her head, and she runs back, and she jumps into the arms of the store owner. And she says, "I want you." Right? That's what we have the opportunity to know. And when you get him, you get everything in the store. And that's what God wants to give to us. He wants to bless us like that. Now, in ways that also cause our formation. And that's the hard thing we have with it. We go, "God, where are you? Why aren't you telling me? Why aren't you giving me the 6 steps of how I'm going to get there?" It's because he knows we were made for discovery and adventure and mystery. And if he just gave it to us, it would be boring. So I want to live a life of discovery and adventure and mystery. And we all do. It just scares us to death.
Yes, it does. And what a glorious thing to have to trust in that time.
Yeah.
Man, are there, do you think about any other little business ideas at this stage of your journey? Are you starting new things, or are it all just sort of like local things like that? Like, have you ever sat down and ideated new business ideas? If everything went away, you had to start something brand new. Anything come to mind?
Well, yeah. So the big thing that comes to mind for me, everything starts from this. I don't care whether it's starting a new business, whether it's starting a new family, whether it's moving to another city. Everything is about one thing. It's the secret to the kingdom of God. It's the secret to life. It's relationships. It's all about relationships. So whether I'm a real estate agent, and when I had my real estate business, it was all about caring for my people. I'd take gifts around to them, random times. I would have events at my house and invite them all over, and I'd put on these lavish things just because I love getting my people together and caring for them and being a friend and trying to help people out. I love that. And if you make everything in your life about that, you'll be fine. It's all about relationship with God, relationship with yourself, and relationship with others. That is all there is in life. And so if you think about that and how do I serve other people and how do I care for them and how do I love on them, you'll be fine in whatever you do.
Amen. Yep.
So
I'm
in real estate, I cared for people, and P.S., I made some money selling their houses.
I love it. I'm noticing that is what's happening right now as well. I have always, in the past, up until this point, gone for how do I make this into a business that makes money? Because that's the point. I need to make money. I need to survive somehow. So how do I do that? And only in this particular business, which, I'm listening to Dad Work, you guys can go figure that out. Only in this particular podcasting business has it been, the last 3 years, God was gracious in, providing for us through Dad Work, but that wasn't the point. The point was that I now know hundreds of amazing people and I can serve them. I can offer expertise or even knowledge or relationships. I've connected a bunch of people, and number one, it feels great. And number two, it's building a nice little business all of a sudden. And it's not any of what I used to do, which is what do the numbers say? What does the spreadsheet say? And it's been really peaceful. So I will throw my weight behind that. Steve, thank you for doing this. I really appreciate you, man. Where could people find you? By the way, if you guys want any of this in terms of like the identity piece Steve was talking about, not being beholden to those lies anymore, you have to give him a call. Find him on whatever the coaching website is. He's amazing. Where could people find this kind of stuff?
Well, the best way is to email me, stevepetecoach@gmail.com. And email me, and love to connect, and we can get a coaching session together or whatever, however I can help you.
Sweet. Okay, I'll put that in the show notes. stevepetecoach@gmail. Is that it?
Yeah.
Beautiful. All right, guys, thank you so much for listening. Steve, thank you, man. I appreciate you. And we will be back for the next episode in a week.
Awesome. Thanks, Kurt.